right now with lighting in games. Do you see a lot of people converting over? Enterprise industry is kind of literally working within Unreal right now. If anything, you're a pretty hot commodity in other industries because people are finally just starting with real-time tech.
Sure.
What's your view on that? Yeah.
They're definitely trying to marry the two industries, I think, eventually. Like even I worked on Avengers Infinity War, and when I was at Digital Domain, we kind of like had sparse areas of different people who would sit next to us and stuff like that. So we had every now and then we might have one or two people. It's like most of the team was Infinity War, but then we might have one or two people who were working on like a real-time Unreal Engine demo of like a character or something like that. So they had the DigiDoug. They actually did a TED talk on them. The DigiDoug team was like right behind me, and seeing like what those guys were doing in Unreal was like, oh shit! Like they really are pushing and trying to have more control like when they're on set. So being able to see like what a mocapped character would look like in real time is super valuable. You're having things like The Mandalorian, where they have a digital set that they can dynamically light, by the way. So they can change the lighting on set because it's real time. And then that affects the way the characters are lit on the set. So you had the actor who's playing the bounty hunter or whatever. He, was being lit dynamically by huge projectors that had an Unreal Engine environment in it. So this stuff is starting to conjoin, which is super sick. And a lot of my buddies are like super interested in it. They're asking me like, hey, like, how did you get into games? Like, what are the steps I need to take? Because they're all interested and just fascinated by the idea that the stuff's so accessible. Like you can just go to Epic's website and download Unreal Engine for free. And you have like all of Megascan's library for free. So you can compose scenes and like learn pretty quickly, So
yeah, I would love to kind of talk more about the virtual production stuff. Like Mandalorian was a huge milestone. I mean, they started playing around with it on Lion King. It's just the Favreau guy. He's kind of like the pioneer right now. He's like doing everything for everybody. So what's great about the digital sets is that it's literally game development, and a lot of that has to do with lighting artists such as yourself within Unreal. And you're not only illuminating the environments behind the actors, and they're super glad about it because they're not like goofing around and playing improv in front of a green screen anymore. They actually have a set that actually am responding to, and so they're super excited. And not only that, your lighting is basically lighting the actors in the set. And so if anything, lighting is a hot commodity in every industry, especially entertainment. Where do you see that? Yeah, where do you see that growing from here? Like, do you feel like every digital movie is basically going to be asking more and more guys like yourself to be on these sets to kind of help out?
I think green screen heavy movies for sure. Just for the fact that cinematographers can frame their subjects better, right? Like if Peter Jackson's doing another Hobbit movie, he's got the real actors, but he's got this, what it does have a real-time virtual production thing as well. So he's able to frame his shots and get a camera angle with the digital set behind. And without that, it's like you're just kind of shooting from the hip. He has no idea what he's doing. So I definitely think it's going to be more popular. They call it in-camera VFX. I think First Man did the same thing. They built a huge light rig, and that light rig is what lit Ryan Gosling while he's like in the spaceship and stuff. And that saves like a ton of compositing time later, because before you'd have to get the reflections on the visor, clean up anything that was on the visor that you didn't want. But now the director's seeing exactly what the shot's going to look like through the lens, like while it's happening. So it's a huge time saver in post. So I think it's good and bad. I think it's good that what you see is what you get a lot more as you're shooting, which is super cool. But I do think it might be bad in that things are getting faster and simpler, and we might need less people doing it, right? Where you might need, 50 compositors on a movie, maybe you need 20 or something like that. But there's way more content that needs visual effects. So I think there's going to be work, and same with video games. There's everybody trying to make games now and get into the digital side of things. Like I even got hit up randomly from Wayfair. They're like a furniture company,
Right.
and like they have like fully digital things. Like all their like most of their ArcViz stuff is all just digital.
Mm-hmm.
But let me share with you guys the virtual production of The Mandalorian. This is super cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely going to be a hybrid step with the need of like traditional compositors and now virtual production compositors. Do you feel like the traditional compositors, just to future proof, should start to get into our tech, as it seems like this, as Unreal gets better and better, there's going to be, I mean, rendering will always be king, but at some point it's going to get to a high quality bar where with the waiting time and the render farms just don't make as much sense as before. I wonder what your general opinion about that is. There going to be a world where this is going to replace traditional compositing?
I think there's always going to be a place for traditional compositing for sure. These sets are massive, and the work that goes into making these, I don't know what the cost difference would be instead of just doing it all after the fact. I think there's pros and cons. Like you're limited to like this space and the set a little bit, right? Like there's definitely limitations with this workflow. Where I think that you'll always need some form of digital compositing that's completely done in post. But I do think this is cool and exciting that it's another way of doing things. It's cool to see stuff getting pushed forward. Hopefully things will look a little bit more grounded and stuff as well. With like in the terms of reflections and lens flares and stuff, I think there's a weird phase, and like, so you can kind of see it happening here.
It is an interesting time. Like it feels like for a long time, game developers have been like the ugly stepbrother for visual effects companies for a while. And now we're not shoulder to shoulder just yet, but I do feel like there's a certain level of respect that's happening, that that it's becoming more mutual, which is really healthy, because now we're learning from each other. We're more open to learning from each other, and more accepting for people to kind of move back and forth. Whereas like I would even say 5 years ago, that was ridiculous. It's like, get out of here with your PS3 graphics. It's like, I don't need
I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. Like I've heard that on the game side too. Like, might throw a resume somewhere to someone and they're like, oh, it's just, he's only worked at Disney and ILM. Like he's never worked in video games. It's like, yeah, but like, look at his art, it's super good. I'm sure he can figure it out.
Yeah.
But there's like that kind of stigma as well that, oh, they're going to come in and have million poly characters and stuff. They're not going to know what to do. But I think people can learn and people can adapt. Same with a game artist going into film. Like if they want to transition into film, I think a lot of the same theories are similar. It's just technical specifications are a little bit different, but that stuff can be learned. I think people get a little bit intimidated by that. And in some cases, people have been burned by putting trust in someone from a different industry and it not working out. But I don't think there should be like a straight up stigma where you're like, I'm not going to, even take a chance on someone because of this. I think that's stupid. But I do agree. I think now that games are looking better, I think there's like a fascination with people in film, like, oh shit, how do they do that? Like, this looks so good, And that's like, because we're used to rendering shit. Like I had some shots that would take, 24 hours per frame on the render farm.
Yeah.
That's per frame, 24 frames per second. So stuff took forever. So being able to see things run at 30 frames, 60 frames per second, and it looks like not as good, but close, is like super exciting.
What do you think is, in years of difference, maybe in a couple of years, what needs to be done so that bar of it doesn't look as good, it's good enough, but like to a place where you feel like, this is better than sitting 24 hours for one frame, where the average consumer won't be able to tell. I feel like right now the average consumer can't tell. It's mostly visual effects people, just like masturbating to art, basically, right? But like
for sure, dude.
For you personally, where do you think, what needs to be done within the pipeline? I mean, ray tracing is already on board. It's not there where it's widely adopted. It's not in games everywhere yet, but it's getting there. What else? What other tech needs to happen for us to be like, okay, it's here. We don't need to wait 24 hours anymore and wait for to reach the graphics that we need. It will be a difference to the trained eye, but we're here where we're okay with doing this real time.
I think when we get to the level of destruction you can do in like Houdini and stuff, I think that'll be a big one. If you can have that many polys and be able to bring in like caches of like such density of having like a skyscraper collapse or something like that, for example, and bring that into the engine like you would in a feature film where it's like millions and millions and millions of tries, and not having the game engine poop its pants. I think that will definitely, we'll be able to start doing more effects in real time. And then for lighting, ray tracing is pretty good in Unreal right now for shadows. So you can have ray trace shadows from a light. And that's pretty solid, but we're still not there with the global illumination. So the bounce light, that stuff is still pretty janky and it's very expensive. Like you're not going to run at frame rate for a game with their GI right now, unless you have a super beefy computer. And then same thing with reflections, translucency, all that stuff can't be ray traced like you would in a feature film yet. They do have like some forms of it, but for example, with the ray trace reflections, I think there's like a limit on how many times it can bounce a reflection. So if you had like, 6 chrome balls next to each other, they would only reflect each other's reflections so many times, then it would terminate to black. Where in like a pre-rendered thing, you can set that number super high and just wait for the render. So I think we're getting there. But there's just technical limitations still. Doing it, you have all these pros who work in Houdini and Maya and stuff, and they're doing pre-rendered things in Arnold and Redshift and stuff. And, these are some of the smartest people in the world making these renderers, and it still takes hours, So I think for the real-time side of it being good enough, I think we're already kind of seeing that with things like The Mandalorian, where it's good enough. Like it's fine. Like having practical characters in a digital set, I think it's pretty solid. Now having fully digital characters, I think maybe we're ways off from that. But maybe that will be, a thing in the future. Like even the guy I was talking about, the DigiDoug thing at Digital Domain, it's still really, really good, but there's still the uncanny valley. You can tell it's a digital dude, even with pre-rendered stuff, that's like one of the hardest things to do is a digital human to make look convincing. But I think it's getting there, dude. Maybe PS5, dude. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, speaking about the next gen systems, I don't know if you spec'd it out. Is there anything there that you feel like we haven't really seen like a premier title from any of those two? And with the next systems, you can pretty much, people have rigs that are more powerful than these systems already. But what helps with these consoles, it kind of brings more development teams to kind of push to the limit, which high-end PC users aren't used to, right? You need these consoles to kind of bring in that type of firepower and talent behind it. Do you feel the next system is gonna really push the bar? I mean, what type of tech upgrade do you feel besides maybe ray tracing getting better and more optimal for GI, especially on the Unreal side? They're still wrapping their heads around that. I feel Unity is actually probably doing a better job at figuring out that type of tech. They have a really talented team, but a lot of these games were still using light maps, and it's like it's like 2008, man. Light maps is like most like AAA companies don't even use light maps outside of Unreal anymore. So what were your thoughts about that?
Well, there usually is some kind of baking process that happens for most games, whether that's baking spherical harmonic probes that are, they might have like a diffuse term and like a specular term where they're like providing that lighting information at a given space, and those just interpolate between things. Or you'll have like the traditional light maps like you do in Unreal Engine, or a combo of the two. Like in Unreal Engine, you have volumetric light maps, and those are kind of like spherical harmonic probes. What those do is like give movable objects like the indirect lighting information so that they look like they're receiving some kind of bounce light or shadowing and stuff. So I think maybe with the new systems, if we do go more ray traced, we don't have to do as many cheats and bake as much, which would make things a lot more dynamic. Like I could see games becoming a lot more dynamic. There's a lot of when you have to deal with baked things, you run into issues where it's like, what's a physics object and what's not? Like, why can I blow up that barrel, but I can't knock over that Coke can that's on the table? It's like, oh, because that's baked. Like we want that to stay static because it's cheaper and the lighting looks better.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So you run into those kind of issues where I think physics is really bound right now, and I think physics stuff is going to get way better with the new platforms. Lighting for sure is going to get a lot better, and I think level streaming and the way that the engine's able to handle like huge open spaces and stuff is probably going to get a lot better too.